So there's a very common expression, ndesu, which is a contraction of no desu, and it sounds like this.
父料理うまい。そうなんですね。
Here she said, そうなんですね, using ndesu, and it means something like, oh, I see. It's probably not difficult to understand this, so why is ndesu so difficult for non-native speakers? Well, it's a very contextual expression, and it can sound right or wrong depending on the exact context. And there's no simple rules that can be universally applied. Textbooks might teach you oversimplified rules, but if you always follow these rules, you will end up sounding wrong. But at the same time, even if you mess up, you don't really know if you do because people can probably understand you from the context, and they don't bother correcting you. In short, ndesu can be challenging in a similar way that basic particles like wa, ga, ni, de can be challenging. And if I have to explain ndesu in an abstract way, I would say that we use it when there's a pre-existing context and it implies that there's something much more than what is being said. So we don't use ndesu to describe a simple fact like ポチタは悪魔です. Pochita is a devil. If I use ndesu and say ポチタは悪魔なんです in this context, it sounds wrong. But ポチタは悪魔なんです is a grammatically correct sentence and can be used in some situations. For example, if somebody says, hey, that's a cute animal, I could reply, yeah, he's cute, but 実はポチタは悪魔なんです. In fact, Pochita is a devil. So here we have a context that somebody says that Pochita is cute. And despite the fact he's cute, he's actually a devil. So that's what I meant by if you use ndesu, it implies there's much more than what's being said. So now you can see if I try to explain ndesu in an abstract way, it can be very complicated. So don't spend so much time trying to find abstract rules because they're not going to be super practical. That's why I will give you specific situations where we would use ndesu so that you can learn it in a practical way. But if you don't know basic Japanese, I will teach you the kind of Japanese the real-life Japanese people today actually speak because textbooks and apps don't really teach you how real-life Japanese works. So click the link in the description and subscribe to my email group. So we use ndesu and more specifically ndeskedo to give you some background information like this.
結婚にどういうことを求めてらっしゃいます？
僕ちょっとアフリカ行ってるんですけど、
アフリカ？
はい、アフリカに連れて帰りたいです。
So they asked him what he looks for in his future wife, and he uses ndesu to give you background information, which is he lives in Africa. So he said, アフリカ行ってるんですけど, and his main idea is he wants to take his future wife back to Africa. アフリカに連れて帰りたいです. The word けど typically means but here it doesn't necessarily mean but. It's part of ですけど to give you background information. I will give you another situation. Let's say you are in Tokyo and you want to go to Akihabara, because of maid cafe and stuff. You want to take the train, but you don't know which train to take. So you would ask, すいません、秋葉原に行きたいんですけど、どの電車に乗ればいいですか? Here, I used ndesu to give them background information, which is, I want to go to Akihabara. 秋葉原に行きたいんですけど. And the thing I really want to ask is, どの電車に乗ればいいですか? Which train should I take? So that's how you use ndesu. And in this situation, you can actually just say, すいません、秋葉原に行きたいんですけど. Because if you use ndesu, it sounds like there's much more than what is being said. And in this situation where you are at the station, it's pretty obvious that you want to know which train to take. So you don't have to say the complete sentence. You can just say ですけど, and people will understand what you want. But if you said this in a more neutral way, 秋葉原に行きたいです, it doesn't have the same effect because it sounds like you are just stating a fact that you want to go to Akihabara. So this is one of the biggest differences between neutral statements and statements using ndesu. The next situation is when you ask a question like 何 what, 誰 who, なんで why, etc. Example.
私、渡ると言いま
渡
す。
さん、
はい。
何をしてる方なんですか？
僕は今、
渡さんは。
ATK の
Here, she's using ndesu to ask what the guy does. And the structure of the sentence is a bit more complicated than the English version. What do you do? Because she said, 何をしてる方なんですか? But you can also say it in a more simple way. 何してるんですか? What are you doing? Or what do you do? And it means more or less the same. She's just being a bit more polite. And you can still use ですか? But here's the tricky part. In this exact situation, you actually don't have to use ですか? You can also say 何してる方ですか? And it's completely natural. And life is more difficult when you have choices. You can say this way, or you can also say this way. It's like being a main character of a harem anime. So many girls to choose from. And you can see that in the exact same show because there's also this scene.
ななこさんは何してる人ですか？
今は
He said, 何してる人ですか? Without using ですか? And he could also say, 何してる人なんですか? And that's perfectly fine and there's no huge difference. But things can be a bit different if you are in an emotional situation. Take a look at this.
ではやりましょう。マジでいいんですか？
Now you can see this is an emotional scene. She said, マジでいいんですか? Is it really okay using ですか? And because this is an emotional situation, saying it in a neutral way, マジでいいですか? doesn't quite have the same effect.
マジでいいんですか？やだもう、雪の下先輩超好きっていうかさっきの何だったんですか？超怖かったんですけど、ああいうのほんとやめてほしいんですけど。
And she also said, さっきの何だったんですか? What was it with you just now? Using です。And again, this is an emotional statement, so saying it さっきの何でしたか doesn't quite sound right here. So your subjective experience can make a difference when it comes to using ですか. So we often use です when we ask a question. And we can also use です when we answer a question. Take a look at this.
おいどうした
もう3日も何も食べてないのです。
So the question was, どうした? What happened? And she answered, もう3日も何も食べてないのです. I haven't eaten anything for 3 days. So we sometimes use です to explain things. And Genki actually says that we use です to explain things, which isn't entirely wrong, but Genki's explanation is oversimplified because there's many other situations where we would use です. And I see that many people get confused because they follow textbooks explanations. But don't worry, I will give you more detailed explanations in this video. And then again, in this situation, you don't have to use です. You can also say もう3日も何も食べてません. And that makes sense too. Here's another example.
あのさ、なんでここで映画見てたのお前。
資料として見てたんですよ。
Here she said, 資料として見てたんですよ. We were watching it as a reference, using です. And again, you don't have to use です in this situation, so you can also say 資料として見てました. If you ask me about the difference between using です and not using です, I would say if you use です, it sounds more like actually or as a matter of fact. So you kind of make it sound like it's important information that the other person might not know. And you can probably hear that in the tone of her voice. Like in this example.
とりあえずは予備の第二発令状を使用するしかないわね。
椅子はきついし、センサーは硬いし、やりづらいんですよね、ここ。
Here she said, やりづらいんですよね、ここ. It's hard to do things here, using ですよね. And because she's using ですよね here, it sounds like there's some emotions here. And in this case, it's a negative emotion, like she's complaining. She could also say, やりづらいです、ここ. It's hard to do things here, but this sounds more neutral, like she's just stating a fact. And in a similar way, you can also use it to declare something, as though you are saying, listen to me. Example.
爆発系統の魔法が好きなんじゃないんです。爆裂魔法だけが好きなのです。だって私は爆裂魔法を使うためだけにアークイザードの道を選んだのですから。
So she's passionately telling everybody what she likes. And remember, ndesu is just a contraction of ndesu, so they mean more or less the same thing. And with this kind of passionate phrase, like, listen to me, this is what I like, using ndesu conveys this kind of emotion pretty well. I don't think not using ndesu works in this situation. 爆裂魔法だけが好きです. Yeah, that wouldn't work here. But if it doesn't have the same intensity, for example, if she's just explaining what she likes, she could say, oh yeah, 爆裂魔法だけが好きです. So you can see the difference is very subtle. Now let me show you the next example.
怒り知る。猫が死んだんです。
Now this is a very dramatic scene, and if she says, 猫が死んだんです, my cat died, using ndesu, it sounds like she wants to say much more than the fact that her cat died. And sure enough, this happens.
なぜダミーシステムを破壊した？
あなたに抱かれても嬉しくなくなったから。私の体を好きにしたらどうです？あの時みたいに。
So, 猫が死んだんです is a very dramatic way of starting a conversation. If she just said it in a neutral way, 猫が死にました, it sounds more like she's just stating a fact, even though it still sounds dramatic because of the content. If you ask me, 猫が死んだんです sounds more like her focus isn't actually on the cat. It's something else, such as her emotion. But if she said, 猫が死にました without using ndesu, her focus is probably the cat, because the event itself is important. But this is a very subjective take, so if you ask different Japanese people, you will probably get different answers. And another emotional example is that we often use ndesu when we protest. Listen to this.
なんでゴムを飛ばして遊んでるの？子供なの？違うのです。雲が。
So when she uses ndesu here, it sounds like, listen to me, you got it wrong, so you feel the emotion behind this. She could also say 違います, which is more like stating a fact, but at the same time, it can actually sound a bit more decisive. But then again, this is just my personal interpretation. And speaking of 違う, I just remembered this scene from Attack on Titan.
俺は化け物かもしれませんが、こいつは関係ありません。信用できるか？事実です。構うってことはやっぱり仲間だ。違う。
Here, Aaron just said 違う instead of 違うんです. And again, 違う sounds more decisive to me. If he said 違うんです here, it would sound more like he's whining. So I think 違う sounds better here. It's more aggressive. And because of that, using ndesu can sound a bit more sympathetic compared to not using ndesu. I want to give you another example of protesting. Check this out. And you can see that she's very unhappy with the situation, and you can hear the panic in her voice. And ndesu can express so many emotions. And if you watch Konosuba, Aqua actually uses ndesu a lot.
私、出汁を取られてる紅茶のティーバッグの気分なんですけど。
And when we use ndesu, it's usually because we are discontent, we are unhappy about something, or we are complaining or protesting. So watch Konosuba, listen to Aqua, and you can master this particular version, ndesu. Now, another situation I should definitely talk about in this video is reacting to something. Because when we react to something, we very often use ndesu. Just like our first example, this one.
父料理うまい。そうなんですね。
She's reacting. そうなんですね. And she could also say, 料理うまいんですね. Oh, I see that he's a good cook. Paraphrasing what Anya said. And this is a very common way of using ndesu in real life, so you should remember it. If you say you like anime, I can react by saying, アニメ好きなんですね. Oh, I see that you like anime. Or if you tell me you are a devil hunter by trade, I could react by saying, へえ、デビルハンターなんですね. Oh, I see that you are a devil hunter. And so on. Now, let's think about this situation. Yo visits her house. It's the first time for Yo to see this house because she starts living there with her pretend husband, Lloyd. And she just learned Lloyd is a good cook. Now, with that knowledge, she can say to Lloyd, ロイドさんって料理うまいんですね. Oh, I see that you're a good cook, Lloyd. Using ですね. This implies that she learned that Lloyd is a good cook somewhere else prior to this. And it's also as though saying, oh, I didn't know that, because we also use です when we discovered something. So it's like, ロイドさんって料理うまいんですね. I just discovered it, and I didn't know that. And in this situation, you can't say, ロイドさんって料理うまいですね. Because if you do, it sounds like it's common knowledge. The kinds of situations where she can say, ロイドさんって料理うまいですね are, for example, she's watching Lloyd cook. So they're in the same situation and sharing the same experience. Or after living together for a while and she already knows that he's a good cook. So there's no surprise or discovery. And in the first situation where she's watching Lloyd cook, she could also say, ロイドさんって料理うまいんですね as a reaction to the situation. And with ですね, you can sense an element of surprise or she's impressed. So these are some subtle differences. And you can also use です to confirm something. Take a look at this.
僕が病院に送られたんです。
お兄ちゃんいるんですか？
Here, she used ですか because she already knows that her brother was probably there. She heard him speak. So she said, いるんですか? Are you there? If she used the neutral version, お兄ちゃんいますか? It would sound like she doesn't quite know if her brother was there. So that's the difference. Again, いるんですか is more like her reaction to her assumption, and いますか is a neutral question. With this, you can also explain the difference between アニメ好きですか? Do you like anime? And アニメ好きなんですか? Do you like anime? アニメ好きですか? It's just a general question, so you can randomly say that to somebody. But アニメ好きなんですか sounds more like a reaction. For example, if you see my lock screen, you can kind of assume that I like anime. So you can say, アニメ好きなんですか? Do you like anime? As a question, or アニメ好きなんですか? Oh, I see that you like anime. As a reaction. And so far, I've only talked about です which contains です which means it's 敬語 or honorific language. Remember, when you use です must or their variations, you are using 敬語. です must are also called 丁寧語 which is part of 敬語. And we also speak plain Japanese without using 敬語. And when we do, instead of using です we use んだ or の. Let me give you some examples.
なんでゴムを飛ばして遊んでるの？子供なの？
Here she said, 遊んでるの? 子供なの? And の is similar to です. If I use 敬語 here, it would be 遊んでるんですか? 子供なんですか? So I just replaced の with ですか. Another example.
っていうかなでこちゃんってお兄ちゃんのことが好きなんだよね。何のことかね。
Here she said, 好きなんだよね. She's using だ instead of ですか. If I used ですか here, it would be 好きなんですよね. So the conversion is pretty easy once you get the hang of it. So you can group です だ and the sentence ending の together. Now, I hope you're still with me because I'm going to talk about common mistakes that non-native speakers make. And the first one is using ndesu to describe a simple fact. For example, if I ask you, 昨日何しましたか? What did you do yesterday? You can answer by saying something like, 健全なアニメを見ました. I watched a family-friendly anime. A common mistake here is saying something like, 健全なアニメを見たんです. It's weird because it sounds like there's much more to it when in fact there's none. You're just making a factual statement. But I can react to it by using ですか and say, そうなんですね. Because we often use ですか when we react to something. Or I can also use ですか and say, 本当に健全なアニメなんですか? Was that really a family-friendly anime? Because we often use ですか to ask a question. Now, if you are at a more advanced level, you could start your story with a plot twist with ですか. And it goes like this. 昨日アニメ見たんですよ. I watched an anime yesterday. And using です sounds like there's much more to it. So you continue. で、健全なアニメだと思ったら健全なアニメじゃなかったです. And I thought it was a family-friendly anime, but it wasn't. So that's the kind of situation where you can use this. Now I want to talk about another very common mistake that I always see on YouTube. For example, if you watch this kind of video and comment, 面白い動画なんです. It's weird because there's nothing else to the statement. So you should just say, 面白い動画ですね. And it's kind of interesting because when I get a bunch of comments in Japanese on my YouTube video, this is one of the things that gives away that you're not a native speaker, which by the way isn't a bad thing. So don't be afraid of making mistakes. Keep commenting on YouTube videos. But if you master this kind of thing, you will sound very natural that people can't tell if you're not a native speaker. So if you love languages and if you're very ambitious, you can aim for that kind of level. Anyway, let me give you some examples of using this. For example, you can react to this video using this and say, ですってそう使うんですね. Ah, you use です that way. Or at a more advanced level, you could say, ですって難しいんですよね. This is really hard. This is not a simple factual statement because it implies you've been struggling with it, or maybe you are overwhelmed by its difficulty. But as you can see, this is a very contextual expression and you can't possibly master this from reading textbooks. You just have to get a lot of input from authentic materials like anime, movies, YouTube videos, or talking to real-life people. So if you want to learn Japanese with me, I will teach you the kind of Japanese that real-life Japanese people today actually speak, because textbooks and apps don't quite explain how real-life Japanese works. They oversimplify it. So click the link and subscribe to my email group, Japanese with Yuta.